Another key component that we can't skip over when it comes to happiness is understanding addiction and how we really need to get this under control to help maintain that happiness long term. Right. So, again, before we get into this, I just want to advise if you are dealing with addiction, please speak with a professional, a medical professional. There's plenty of hotlines and places that you can reach out to for professional help. So I just want to preface all this by saying that for me personally, I'm not a professional in any sense regarding addiction. So, please look to outside resources to get professional help with dealing with addiction. But that being said, in the overall context of this course, I do think it is important to just touch on the topic and have a better understanding of it, right? And so I think a lot of times when people hear the word addiction, the first thing your mind immediately jumps to is something very extreme where somebody can't even function and they're, a drug addict living on the street, homeless. But I think addictions can start out very subtly. And a lot of times I think it can control somebody's life and they may not even be aware that they're being controlled by it. Or it may have control, but they're still able to manage it to some degree. So it may not really feel like an addiction because they're not that homeless person out on the street, right? They're still functioning within society. And so with this, I just want to give my personal experience with addiction, figuring out ways of how to overcome it, and just giving my unique perspective on it and thinking about how you can change the way you think about addiction and just understanding how important this piece of it really is, right? So for me personally, I've been pretty fortunate to not really deal with, I guess, an intense addiction, right? I never really dealt with something to the point where it was completely taken over my life. Now, to be honest, I would say there's two main things which have controlled, had a certain level of control in my life, which would be alcohol and pornography. So first for alcohol, on one side of the family, I think just to a certain degree it was genetic, right? Family members who had alcoholism running in the family. And so, when it comes to alcohol, that's something that I discovered in high school as a way to help me break out of my shell and help me essentially kind of run away from who I really am. Because growing up, I learned to not like myself, and there was parts of myself, especially the social side of myself, which I really despised. And so I would use alcohol as a crutch and as a way to become a different. The whole binge drinking, I would do that quite a bit. Did a lot of damage to my body, but I still had it under control. But at the same time, I still felt this obligation to drink, and I felt like I couldn't really have fun and I couldn't really enjoy life if alcohol wasn't involved. And so in that sense, I do think it was controlling me. And then, fast forward a few more years when I, moved across the country and when I hit that real low point, I definitely was using alcohol to a more extreme degree. And I was using it as a way to cope and deal with pain and ultimately escape the pain that I was going through. And so that looked like drinking, I'd say probably about 4 days a week or so, compared to the 2 or 3 days before that. So the frequency was there. And then one other thing I noticed with the drinking too, especially during that low point, was the intensity of it increased quite a bit. It seemed like the control I had over it was gone, right? So whenever I was in college, even though I was binge drinking, I would still have control and still be able to stop myself from blacking out, right? I would basically be able to push myself to a certain level, but for the most part, still be able to remember mostly everything, be still somewhat in control of what I was doing. But when I hit that low point years later, that's where things got kind of scary, to be honest. There was a couple times where I actually straight up blacked out, didn't remember anything. And one moment where I very easily could have died from alcohol poisoning. I was extremely fortunate that I had a friend close by who was able to take care of me. But basically, ended up going to this hotel, partying with some famous people or relatively famous people, and I was extremely excited and sort of nervous to be in that atmosphere. And I ended up drinking way too much, way too quickly, and I completely blacked out, didn't remember anything. And I woke up the next day in my car, just puke all over myself. And the thing that was really scary about it was I was very fortunate that the friend who helped me out, he put me in my car, but he had me sitting upright. And, when I was in my sleep, I ended up, throwing up all over myself. But if for whatever reason, if he laid me back or he just let me lay down, I easily could have thrown up in my sleep and ended up choking on it and, dying, right? And so just that sort of pinnacle of it, or that point where I'm completely out of control of my body, the intensity of it's increasing, the frequency's increasing, I would personally say was an addiction to some degree, right? This substance, alcohol, had a control over my life, and I wasn't completely in control, and it was affecting my life in a negative way. So that was my personal experience with alcohol, and how I was able to manage and kick that was right. Well, before we go any further, I just full disclosure, I still drink, right? But it's a lot less frequently, and I would say maybe once every 2 months at this point, right? So it's nothing nearly like it was before, and if I am, it's more so for actually celebrating something versus drinking to cope. But how I was able to get out of that was, change a couple things. First, just change the environment, change a lot of the triggers that are associated with that, right? So, I mean, that's going out to the bars and the nightlife. And for me personally, if I'm in that situation, it's very hard for me to resist the temptation of drinking. So, an easy way to do that is just remove myself from that situation entirely. And something else that I was able to change, which really helped, was just changing the way I think of it. And I started thinking of it more so as something I could use to celebrate versus just a normal everyday thing. Because it got to a point where, I started thinking to myself, okay, if I'm going out every single weekend, like, what the fuck am I celebrating? Like, what? You don't have anything to celebrate. What do you should be on your mission. You should be focused on improving your life instead of destroying your body and hurting yourself. And so, sort of that mental reframing also helped with just changing the way I went about it. And I mean, just being aware too of the social circle and the people you're around, right? So a lot of the folks I hung out with in high school were mostly into that type of lifestyle, and if I continue to have people around me like that, so even say coworkers who love to go out to happy hour all the time, if those were the main people in my social circle and those were the main goals that they have, well then obviously I'm gonna pick up a lot of those characteristics and I'm gonna be following their suit. So if my main friends are like, oh yeah, we just finished up a hard week of work, let's go grab some drinks. If those are the main people I'm friends with, then it's gonna be pretty easy for me to follow their lead. Whereas if I'm surrounded by other people who don't drink, then likewise I'm gonna pick up those habits as well. So I would say those are the three main things that really helped me just gain control of alcohol again. Was, number one, changing my environment, to reframing the way I think about it and sort of what it's used for and what I was using it for. And then number three is changing my circle and the people that I'm interacting with. So, that's just my personal experience with alcohol and depression, and understand, my personal experience with addiction. Again, I'm I have a lot of empathy for folks who are actually going through, a legitimate addiction. And again, I'm not trying to posture or act like I know exactly what you're going through, because I I don't. And a lot of folks are going through a lot tougher stuff. But I do have a hunch that a lot of addiction, again, I'm not a professional, this is just my personal opinion, but I do have a hunch that a lot of times addiction it's a gradual thing, right? You don't just wake up one day and you have an addiction. It's a slow, gradual control over your life. And then eventually, years later, you wake up and you look around and you say, how the fuck did I get here? So that's my personal take on it. And so the reason I wanted to share my experience with the alcohol was, I firmly believe if I didn't get a better grasp on it, it easily could have morphed into something very ugly and destructive. So I'm mostly covering that so that way, in case there is anybody else out here watching who, if we're being honest with ourselves, has some type of addiction or something that has control over them, and they haven't quite mastered it yet, but they're still, a functioning person in society. Just understanding that this stuff is extremely important, and it's extremely important to take very seriously. You know, this is your one life, and especially when we're younger, it's so easy to think that, oh, we're going to be young forever, right? My body's going to have a fast metabolism. I'm going to be able to metabolize all this drugs and alcohol and all this stuff I'm taking in. But understanding that, a lot of diseases that happen, like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and stuff, a lot of those will begin 20 to 30 years before the symptoms actually start. And so here's the thing, man. Nobody's like, especially once you're an adult, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you're an adult. At the end of the day, nobody's really going to give a fuck about your life. Like, it's ultimately up to you to take charge of your current life, the direction it's going, and be extremely serious about it. If, let's say, if you have a drinking problem and, it's at your core, that you have a dependency on alcohol, instead of just trying to joke it away and dismiss it, and if you know this is something that you should ultimately address to live a happy, fulfilled life, that's something that's extremely serious. And I don't think a lot of people are talking about this, the whole sort of casual addiction, right? Oh, well, I'm still showing up to work. I'm still able to hang out with my kids. I'm still able to do this. And so if you're still able to function, there's not as much pressure or emphasis on getting that piece of it right. But I guarantee you, if you just have to treat this with a high level of seriousness, because the easiest time to fix and address some type of a problem is right now. Because if you put it off till tomorrow, it's that much harder. And the more you kick the can down the road, the less likely you are to actually take responsibility and correct the issue and evolve into that better version of yourself. And once you do that, that's where the real happiness and growth comes from. I firmly believe that when it comes to depression, a lot of times people are saying, well, I'm depressed and I don't like where my life's at. I think depression is just a subtle way of our subconscious mind telling us whatever it is that you're doing, man, isn't working, right? So if, let's say you're a frequent drinker who has an anger problem and you're feeling depressed. Well, maybe at the core of yourself, you know that you're better than this. And you know that you shouldn't have a drinking problem. And you know that you're spending way too much money and energy around alcohol. And you know that your children don't deserve to be yelled at because of your alcoholic fits. And you know that within yourself, you can do a lot better, but you're not right now. And I think because, going back to that other video of the cognitive dissonance, where if at your core, you know that this is a problem that you've been putting off dealing with for a while and you're not addressing it, then that could very easily be contributing to your overall depression and unhappiness, right? But a really cool thing happens once you take responsibility for where your life is at, acknowledge that however great or shitty your life is right now, it's 100% your fault. And the moment that you accept that and then take an honest look at what are your actions on a daily basis. If you're consistently drinking all the time, and that's wasting a bunch of money and not allowing you to be productive and grow in your spirituality and health and family life, then that's something that you should change. Or if you're engaging in other types of addictive behaviors like pornography or gambling or drugs or cigarettes or whatever the selection is, there's plenty of stuff. Video games, the choices are endless. Internet addiction, right? There's plenty of stuff that it becomes so easy for us to become addicted to. And again, our brain is just like a computer program, and if you do something enough, and if there's a component of feeling good in it, right? If you do something and it feels good, that's just going to reinforce you to do it more and more and more. But this can be very destructive if you're engaged in one of these addictive behaviors, which is not ultimately building you up. It's not building up your health, wealth, happiness. It's not building up your family life. You're ultimately hurting yourself. And we can try and distract ourselves all we want. We can try and push things down the road, but our subconscious mind, our real self, we can't fool. It knows everything. It's picking up on everything that we're doing, saying, acting, and feeling. And so if you were like me, right, where I knew I was better than drinking to cope with pain. I knew that there was a stronger dude in here who could kick that bad habit of hurting myself, right? The world is tough enough trying to live an amazing life, do all the amazing stuff that you want to do. Life is hard enough without hurting yourself and putting yourself down, right? And so the moment I took responsibility for my current actions, I looked myself in the eye and said, you know what, dude, you're fucking up and you're not living up to who you should be. And your behavior is not what's in here. And the moment I acknowledged that, and again, it wasn't necessarily easy. It wasn't just I had that conversation and then it was great the next day. There was plenty of ups and downs throughout it. And, that's something that I still struggle with. And, maybe talk to me a year from now and I'll completely quit alcohol, right? I've done plenty of dumb, destructive things, not only myself and others. And, it's ultimately not fair to a lot of the other folks that I've hurt in the process, which ultimately I feel a lot of guilt and shame for, which again just further hurts me and holds me down from trying to, become the better version of myself. And so where this is all going is, again, obviously, if you have a major addiction where it's severely impacting your life, please speak with a professional. But the main goal of this video here was more so to address the addiction, which a lot of people maybe don't know they have or that they ignore. But understanding that addiction is a gradual process, and if you don't have control of it, it can ultimately destroy your life. If you don't have self-control and if you can't manage that, that can ultimately destroy your life. A great example, take a look at Tiger Woods, right? This guy was on top of the world, had everything he ever wanted, beautiful family, best golfer in the world, super wealthy, and then it ultimately ended up crashing down. Why? Because he had a sex addiction which he couldn't manage. And look what happened since then. He lost his family. He's fallen off as the best golfer. He's really never been able to reclaim or get to that point of where he was before. And, ultimately he fell from grace. Why? Because he had an addiction which he probably thought was manageable, right? Well, as long as I'm still able to win these great events and tournaments, as long as I'm still able to keep my family, this is something I can manage. But ultimately, it tore the guy down. And so I just think with addiction, you can never underestimate it. And it's extremely tricky and seductive and destructive, and it ultimately leads to no good. And the sooner that you can acknowledge if there is something, right, something that's controlling your life in a negative way, first acknowledging that and then taking those hard steps to correct it or at least minimize it, improve it, make some progress with it. And the moment you do that, at your core, you're going to start to feel really proud of yourself. And once you do that, that's going to immediately shift the way you feel about yourself. And I think ultimately you're going to feel a lot more motivated, a lot happier. And I think that will help ultimately with your depression and feeling sadness. So again, this was kind of a long one, but it's a really important one. And I've seen many folks, myself included, but other folks go down just really bad roads due to addiction. And so I just really wanted to stress the importance of this, having that blunt, real conversation with yourself, not backing down, and seeing what you can do to, change it. But again, with this, I can't emphasize this enough. If you are dealing with something, gambling, suicide, alcohol, drugs, pornography, sex, internet, video games, whatever the case may be, please, go use the internet, find a professional who deals with addiction. There's plenty of free resources out there. And I just want you to know that there's plenty of people out there and organizations who really do want to help you. Again, I'm not a professional. I'm just a dude sharing my experience and my thoughts. So again, thank you for watching, and we'll get into the next video. In this section, we're going to be talking about sugar, how that relates to your overall diet, and how by managing sugar can make you feel tremendously better. So there was a study that came out of the British Journal of Psychiatry called Dietary Pattern and Depressive Symptoms in Middle Age. And basically what this paper concluded was that those folks who ate a processed food diet, so again, mostly the fast food, mostly a lot of the junk that's in our supermarkets, like the Oreos, Doritos, the non-real foods, they had an increased likelihood of experiencing depression in later years versus the other people in the study who ate real whole healthy foods like vegetables and fruit. Another startling statistic comes from the CDC, where they recently reported that 100 million Americans are either diabetic or at the pre-diabetic levels. So obviously not 100 million people currently have diabetes, but what that study is saying is if everybody does what they're currently doing and they don't change anything and they just keep doing it, there's going to be a total of 100 million people who do eventually get diabetes if things don't change. And this is really scary because this is a third of the entire population. One other thing that you should be aware of is there's a really great documentary on Netflix called Fed Up. It's sort of produced and partially narrated by Katie Couric, who used to be on the Today Show. And basically what they talk about is how the food industry has put sugar in nearly everything. And it's gotten adults so addicted to sugar that it's like a drug. And that's why I personally believe it's so hard to eat healthy and kick all this processed, junky food. And, I think especially within today's society, there's so much talk around addiction. And, right now we got the opioid crisis going on. Obviously, there's a debate around marijuana and alcohol. And I absolutely agree with having good conversations about those stuff, right? Those things are hurting society, and I think it's worth talking about. But for whatever reason, I don't hear a public conversation being had about sugar and understanding that as adults, we're addicted to sugar and it's controlling our lives, and we're allowing it to force us to eat bad foods versus good foods. And we're consuming too much sugar, which is ultimately hurting our bodies, destroying it, and increasing our likelihood for a lot of these other diseases, right? So the first thing to be aware of with sugar is that's the reason why it makes it so hard for us to lose weight. Fruit is nature's dessert. So if we go back thousands of years, people didn't have all this sweet stuff we have today, right? But when they were lucky enough to come across fresh fruit, which certainly wasn't always, they would have fruit as a way to have something sweet and enjoy. but that's not something that's readily available all year long. And and the reason why I'm bringing up fruit, for those who don't know, fruit has sugar in it, right? It's just when you eat sugar that's in fruit, your body's going to break it down a lot easier because there's fiber within the fruit, right? So you're eating fruit, fructose and fiber versus just straight up sugar. And so when you're eating at least the sugar with the fiber, your body breaks it down a little bit easier, and it's easier for your body to process it versus just the straight raw sugar. But if you have excessive sugar consumption, your body is going to naturally hold on to fat. So this is why if you consume a lot of extra sugar, you make it extremely difficult for yourself to lose weight. To really put this into context, this was extremely eye-opening for me. The average adult is only supposed to have about 25 to 40 grams of sugar in a day. That's it. And to put this into context, one soda, let's say a Mountain Dew or a Dr. Pepper, has around 60 grams of sugar. So one drink is already more than your recommended amount. And then there's some people who are having 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these. But it's not just soda, it's a plethora of other drinks out there. Any type of tea, any type of naked juice, any type of fruit drink, any type of, basically anything, any type of drink that's not water is basically going to have, or coffee or tea. But even with coffee, you have to be careful about, if it's a Starbucks Frappuccino, that's going to be loaded with it versus a coffee that's black, right? But first, just bringing the awareness to it of how much am I actually supposed to be consuming? And that's going on a tangent too much, but I firmly believe this is the reason why, too, it's so hard for kids to pay attention in school and function, right? If we're giving for lunch or breakfast, right? Let's say for breakfast, we're sitting our kids down, giving them a bowl full of cereal, which, giving them some Cocoa Puffs, which has a bunch of sugar in it. And then they put milk on top of that, which has a bunch of sugar in it. And then we give them some orange juice, which is just not even nutritious. It's just straight sugar. And then we send them on their way. And then we expect them to pay attention and not be bouncing off the walls and not be moody and not be respectful, right? Obviously, you're just giving your kid a bunch of, you're giving them a high dose of a drug. And then what happens when it wears off? They're going to get moody. They're not going to listen to you. And then what happens? They go to the school lunch. And then what are the school lunches serving? Well, again, they're serving processed, fake food that the kid eats, and then that gives them that boost of energy again, and then they're crashing again, and then they're moody, right? And so, to put this into context, I believe an applesauce has about 10 to 12 grams of sugar, I want to say, right? So with one applesauce, you've already gotten halfway there for the daily quota of sugar that your kid should be consuming. Right. Again, I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a doctor. So obviously speak with your doctor. And things may be different for children because they're growing. They can metabolize it quicker. Right. So, but I'm just saying in a more general sense of understanding how ingrained sugar really is in our diet and how that affects things. One other thing with sugar and making it tough to lose weight, there's been studies that have come out and shown there's a very high association with visceral fat, or basically the fat that's around our stomach, and higher rates of cancer. And so, if you're trying to work out, you're trying to eat healthier, and for whatever reason, you have a really hard time sticking to something that works for you, a big thing that may be taking you off course is your sugar consumption. And if you're addicted to sugar, like everything else that we're talking about here, first, the fact that you're watching this information, puts you ahead of 95% of the rest of the population. Most people are completely oblivious and want to come up with all these other excuses about, oh, I have a bad thyroid. I have like come up with all these other excuses for why they're getting sick, why they're getting diseases, why things aren't working. Oh, I don't have willpower. But one other point with sugar here too that we need to keep in mind as it relates to health and happiness is sugar causes inflammation in the body, right? And if you the more foods that you consume that raise your inflammation, that messes with your body's natural mechanism to fight off infection and disease, right? So a lot of times, I mean, just take a look in your everyday life. Think of a person or people who are always sick, right? They're always complaining. They always have this mentality, oh, I'm so sick. The flu season's coming around. Well, I guess it's my turn to get sick. Well, if you take a look at their diet, I can almost guarantee you they're eating a bunch of processed, shitty food. And the reason for that is because the processed, shitty food causes inflammation in the body that screws up the body's natural defense mechanisms to fight off infection. So then when a cold does actually go around, they're not able to fight it off effectively. Something else which you can do a little bit more research on your own. I don't want to go too deep into this topic, but Google the microbiome. The majority of our immune cells are within our gut lining. And if you're, again, feeding your gut junk food, then obviously your body is not going to work in the way that it's supposed to. Going back to that analogy of a car, right? Are you going to give it the fuel that actually works for it, or are you going to give it some weird fuel that doesn't work for it? So, again, with sugar and happiness, I would just encourage you to first take an honest look at where your sugar consumption is. Are you addicted to it? If so, what steps can you take to start eliminating some of that sugar and replacing it with better stuff? One other thing to really drive the point home here is take a look in your cupboard. Take a look at nearly any food. And if you take a look at the nutritional label, you'll see for nearly everything, right? Fat, carbohydrates, all that stuff. It'll say how many grams, and then it'll say the daily percentage next to it. It'll say that for nearly everything except for sugar. It depends on the product. I think some products for protein, they don't list out the percentage either, but always for sugar, if you take a look at, okay, this soda has 60 grams of sugar. What percentage is that of my daily recommended amount? It's never going to say the percentage. Never. And the reason why is because if people saw that, that would get them to start thinking, holy shit, what am I doing? Right? But and this sort of ties back in with that documentary of Fed Up on Netflix, which I would highly recommend for you to watch right after you're done with this course. But the food industry is extremely powerful, and there's been lots of lobbyists who have put a lot of time, effort, and money into keeping things the status quo and to keeping adults and children addicted to sugar. And so just by first being aware of how much you're consuming, that's the first thing. The second thing which you can do, and this is something that I've done here, I won't go into it too much, but I just want to give an introduction here. This is a diabetes or like a blood glucose monitor that I got, where I just track my blood sugar, right? So when I say blood sugar, that's what I'm talking about, of being in that diabetic or pre-diabetic range. And so, the whole idea of getting a tool for you to prick your finger and track your blood may not seem like the most fun thing, but I personally see that as a small sacrifice to make So that way, I know where I'm sitting with my diet, right? If for whatever reason I do something new and my blood sugar is spiking higher than the levels of where it should be, then I can catch that a lot quicker and I can start to make adjustments. Or, I can track what is it when it's fasting? Is that a normal range? What is it right after I eat? What is it when I say go home for the holidays and pig out on a bunch of the cupcakes and all that stuff, right? A lot of it's just being mindful and just like not living in the dark, accept reality. Like if you're not happy, just accept it, man. That's how it is right now. But the sooner you come to terms with all these facts of where your life currently is, the sooner you can start to fix it. And I know it's not comfortable. I know it'd be a lot easier to just push it off, be dismissive of something. But again, speaking from personal experience here, the most depressed I've ever been in my life was when I was eating absolute garbage food, my consuming insane amounts of sugar as a way to cope with stress. And ultimately, it led me to having crazy panic attacks and just being all over the place and not being a happy person. So, with this, I know this was a little bit all over the place in comparison to some of the other videos, but this is definitely a topic which I'm just most passionate about this specifically because it just breaks my heart to see how a lot of these politicians, lobbyists in the food industry will just come up with a bunch of nonsense and basically get most people addicted to a drug and then through propaganda spin stuff to a certain way. And it's just like, man, it just breaks my heart to see like how many people are sad and sick and dying, and it's like the majority of this stuff is preventable if people were just aware of how things currently are and then what they can do to change. And once they're aware of that, understanding how they can break out of the system. But I don't know, man. It breaks my heart to see how many people are sick, sad, depressed, broken, and a lot of that is tied to what we're eating. And ultimately, there's just a ton of corporate money that's behind it, that's keeping people in the dark, and it's ultimately killing a lot of people. So, again, I'm sorry that this one was a little bit all over the place, but hope it made sense, and we'll get into the next video here. The next thing that you can do to change your physiology and ultimately make you more happy is by getting regular exercise. There was a recent study that came out of the University of South Wales, I think in just around 2017, where it talked about just 1 hour of exercise can prevent or reduce depression. And basically in the study, what they found was if somebody got just 1 hour of exercise a week, that would reduce the amount of overall depression cases by 12%. And that's just 1 hour. There was another paper that came out of, or article that came out of Harvard, where they explained that regular exercise can help make people feel better. And part of the reason why that is, if you take a look at your brain, there's a certain section of it called the hippocampus. And what that's responsible for is regulating a lot of your mood. But what researchers through this Harvard paper found was that people who are depressed, their hippocampus is actually smaller than people who are happy. However, when somebody exercises, that actually helps build neurons in and around the hippocampus and can actually make that increase in size, which ultimately helps them feel better. And this is sort of relating to the last idea we talked about, but whenever you work out, your brain is going to be releasing those feel-good chemicals. Again, the runner's high, or if you're lifting a bunch of weights and you're getting through a plateau, you're going to feel better. There's a lot of good natural stuff that's happening within your body when you exercise. And as humans, I think at our core, we know this. I don't think I have to spend too much time actually preaching the benefits of exercise versus not exercise, because this is something at our core we know, but it's more so just a matter of making it a consistent thing and really integrating it into part of our lives. And I think the reason why a lot of people don't exercise is because it's not convenient for their life. And they think, well, with my busy schedule, I have kids, I have a career, I have to drive. There's no way that I can do this 5 days a week. And so if I can't do it 5 days a week, I may as well not even try. Or some people may, start and then fall off. And this goes back to another idea I'm talking about, where we really have to change our internal beliefs system. And once we do that, it's going to make the regular exercise that much easier, right? Because I've certainly been there. This is something that I've struggled with, maintaining a consistent gym routine. But once at your core you change your beliefs, this stuff's going to fall into place a lot easier, right? So in my personal experience, one of the beliefs that I started to change about myself is that I'm a happy, healthy person. Before this, when I was in college, I was overweight. I would consistently eat fast food, go out drinking every weekend. And so as a result, right, my actions were telling my subconscious self that you're fat, you're lazy, you're out of shape. And then because my actions were telling myself this, I had this deeply held belief. So then when I wanted to be consistent and go to the gym, when I wanted to stop drinking, when I wanted to get a better diet routine down pat, I would start, but then I would fall off. And I would fall off because my actions have to match up to my deeply held belief. And my belief at the time was I'm a lazy, unmotivated person. And you can see how this is a vicious cycle, right? You have a bad behavior, and then that reinforces a belief. And then that belief reinforces the bad behavior. And then it just keeps going back and forth, and it gets really hard to break out of it. So one thing I would suggest when it comes to exercise is find something that fits in with your life, right? So if you can't afford a gym membership, or if it's too far away, or it doesn't work with your schedule because you have to watch kids, find some type of thing that you can do at home. There is absolutely no excuse for you to not do something at home. There is plenty of videos online, courses, DVDs. There's plenty of at-home gym stuff that you could buy. If you're telling yourself that there's absolutely no time to work out and you can't do it, or you're making all these excuses, the fact of the matter is you're full of shit. There is absolutely time. It doesn't matter what your situation is, what your excuses are. If you're telling yourself that it's not possible to work out and you come up with all these excuses, you're full of shit. And you need to understand that, and then take responsibility for your exercise. Again, start small. Do some Zumba at home, do yoga. For instance, right? For me personally, I didn't even know how to do yoga. And that's something I wanted to learn how to do. So you don't have to spend any money. Simply go to YouTube, type in how to do yoga for beginners. And there is thousands of free videos out there. You search through, find the one that you best connect with, and then follow that, and then do it. It's and again, from a conceptual level, we know this is not hard, but it's this staying consistent with it. And I don't have to preach too much anymore, because after you exercise, you feel better, right? Take two scenarios. You sit on the couch and you don't exercise, or you exercise. What do you feel better after? Obviously, you feel better after the exercising. So again, this is something that I've done to help get me out of that downward spiral, and then flip the switch and start moving my life back in a direction of happiness. So I would highly encourage you to, don't tell yourself that you should work out. Tell yourself that you have to. This is a non-negotiable. Put it in your schedule. Put it in your planner. Your body and your health is the most important thing. And I guarantee you, once you start implementing regular exercise, this is going to help with your overall mood, and you're going to feel better. And once you feel better, the working out is going to become like a drug. You're going to get addicted to the feeling good, and you're going to associate going to the gym or doing that at-home program with happiness. And then that's going to further reinforce you to continue with it. But in the beginning, it takes a little bit of work and effort, but I believe in you. You can do it. And you just need to tell yourself, this is something that I have to do. This is part of my identity now. Don't give yourself any wiggle room. Don't give yourself any option to get out of it. This is something that you have to implement slowly or quickly, however you want to go about it, into your life. But understand that this will help with improving your mood and making you overall happy. Now we're going to talk about your diet and how changing this can really make you feel like a brand new person and give you insane amounts of energy. So, talking first about my personal experience with this, if we go back to that original video within the course, one of the first ones in the introduction section, where I talked about my experience with depression and sadness. And really, when I got to that low point in my life, it was during that time frame when I was not eating healthy at all. Basically, every single day I was eating out. I was eating fast food, whether it be McDonald's, Panda Express, Burger King. That was basically my diet. And I would start off the workday by heading to the gas station and getting a coffee and a donut and like a little treat. And looking back at, where I'm at right now, it's so hard to think that I was at that point, but I understand how I was at that point. I understand because it's extremely easy. And if you're not really thinking about it, it's so easy to fall into that routine, right? And so, I think when I was at my low point, there was a number of factors that contributed to it. But ultimately, diet was definitely a factor that played into me not feeling good and experiencing panic attacks. And during that time frame too, my sugar consumption was just off the charts. But I don't want to go into the sugar piece of it too much. There is another video after this where we'll talk about that. So, first, I understand, right? I live in everyday real world America. I understand how prevalent fast food is. I understand how most of the food out there, it's just so easy and convenient. And especially if you have a busy life and you got a lot going on, it's a lot easier to save the time and get the food from, some fast food joint versus taking the time to actually prepare it, cook, clean, and prep your food, right? So I totally understand. But understanding how food affects our body is very important. And by changing around our diet, that can actually make us feel a lot better. There was a study that came out called the SMILES trial, and you can Google this yourself if you want more details about how the study was conducted. But basically what it did was it took a bunch of adults, took some of them and changed their diet. And the results of the study found that those who changed their diet to a more healthy one reduced some of the symptoms of depression. And those people felt overall happier. And going back to get into my personal experience, this is something that I've felt and I feel like it's a complete game changer. From a common sense level, this just makes a lot of sense. You know, our ancestors thousands of years ago, did they have Captain Crunch? Did they have Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Did they have Oreos? Did they have Wheat Thins? Did they have, all this stuff, Doritos? Did they have all this stuff that we see in our grocery stores today? No. In our everyday life, when we go to the grocery store and we see all this processed food on the shelves, it may seem normal to us because, again, growing up our entire lives, this is the only thing we've been exposed to. But if we take a step back from where we're at, view what's going on in the world in comparison to the rest of humanity, this is a very kind of weird experiment that the human race is going through. This whole idea of us basically eating food that's created in factories almost out of nothing versus eating food that grows naturally on the earth. Why is it that we tell our children to eat your fruits and vegetables versus eating a lot of the processed shit? Well, because at our core, we intrinsically know this, that we should be eating healthier foods. So how can you change up your diet so that way you feel a lot better? Well, again, with this whole video series, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a medical professional. Speak with your dietitian before making any type of dietary changes. But for me personally, something I've done which has helped tremendously and given me a lot of energy throughout the day. Before, I used to be the person guzzling down 5-6 cups of coffee every single day. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoy coffee. I still like it, and I still have a couple cups a day. But I'm to the point where I don't need the coffee for the energy. And I'm full of energy all throughout the day where I don't need that caffeine or the Red Bull to what my daily diet looks like, which has given me a lot of energy, is by having a daily salad. So specifically, how does that look? Well, first, obviously no iceberg lettuce. There's zero nutritional value in that, and it's basically just a filler. So when I say salad, I mean organic spinach, kale, arugula, sort of as the base, and then include a lot of vegetables. So like turnips, onions, and then, a lot of other vegetables, and then, maybe some sort of protein source like salmon, wild caught Alaskan salmon, or eggs. And then here's one major thing where a lot of people will get tripped up on when it comes to salads is they'll put that awful salad dressing on top. So they'll use the ranch or the Dorothy Lynch or the French or Italian. Like the majority of the salad dressings are actually really bad for you and toxic. And the reason for that is a lot of them have a lot of these bad oils in them, like vegetable oil, canola oil, corn seed oil. And it's kind of really sad because if you go through all this work and effort to create this great salad and you dump some awful dressing on top of it, you're negating a lot of the benefits of it. So something that you could do is put extra virgin olive oil on there, and then something that's a lot lighter, so like red wine vinegar as a way for the dressing. And so this is something that again, just speaking from personal experience, I've made a concerted effort to have a salad every single day. And then for the second meal, I'll have something else. But this is something I've done to help almost give me a baseline where I know that I'm at least staying consistent with getting a lot of the micro and macronutrients that my body needs to effectively work, right? Your body isn't going to work the way it's designed if you're putting a bunch of garbage in there. But if you're feeding your body the fuel that it needs, it's going to work a lot better. You're not going to get sick as often, right? Imagine you have a car, and for whatever reason, instead of putting the gasoline that's recommended to put in the car, you put diesel or you put something else that isn't supposed to go in the car. Well, if you do that, what's going to happen? The car is going to have more problems. It's going to break down more often. You're going to have to replace a lot more of the parts. It's not going to work as effectively. It's the exact same idea with the human body. The human body is best designed to use and break down certain types of foods. And if we're putting, again, processed stuff, which our body isn't designed for, well, then no wonder you're going to get sick more often, and it's not going to make you feel as good. So the last point I want to hammer home here, I was watching an interview recently where this doctor or psychologist was basically talking about this whole, he was seeing a patient, and the patient was like very suicidal and had a lot of problems. And they tried everything up to that point, and then sort of as the last straw, they decided to change around his diet and see how that made him feel. And something really interesting happened. So the doctor or psychiatrist advised for this person to do an elimination diet, right? So they took a look at some of the major foods that cause problems for people. So dairy, right? We know some people are lactose intolerant. Gluten. We know some people have celiac disease and can't process that. And so they made a list of elimination diet. They basically started the person off at just ground zero, eating only really healthy stuff, and then slowly they implemented and added these different things back into the diet. Right. So once everything was perfect with this guy's diet, they added dairy back in to see, do you feel any different? No, he still felt great. Next, I added gluten back in. Nope, still felt great. And then what was really interesting was they added corn back into the diet. And right after they added corn, about 20 minutes after this guy finished eating that, he was having hallucinations of pointing a gun in his mouth and basically was suicidal. Right? And so obviously immediately they got him back off it. They gave him a good plan moving forward, and he was good. But just that simple idea of corn, right? A simple ingredient, and how that could affect a person's mental state of mind, and how just that one thing could make them feel insane and really depressed. And so I'm not saying that this is going to be the case for everybody watching here, but that does illustrate a very important point of, as progressive and woke and as smart everybody likes to think we are, I do think there is a lot with the human body which we just don't understand yet. And there's still a lot of research coming out to help figure out how our bodies are and how that relates to our current environment and the food we're putting into it. So again, with this, I would just really encourage you to make an effort to change up your diet. Start making small choices in the right direction, in conjunction with, again, changing around your core beliefs. And in the next video where we talk about sugar, I'll kind of drill down a little bit more about making that switch and moving away from some of the bad foods. But yeah, that wraps it up for this video. Just understand that our diet can have a massive impact on our mental health and the way we think, feel, and act. And please don't underestimate this piece of it, because it plays a very integral role to our mental state of